Hello, I'm Meeper, and I like video games. That's, kinda general, so let's narrow it down to something a bit more specific for this video. Silent narratives in video games. As time has gone on, video games have adapted narratives to better suit their interactive medium. A perfect example of this is the first-person perspective. In classical literature, it denotes a narrative where the main character is telling a story from their perspective and relating their experiences. Some games still follow this classic perspective to its original definition. For example, The Odd Gentleman's take on the King's Quest series. In these games, the narrator is an older version of the main character, the now old King Graham, who is telling stories of his past exploits to his granddaughter, Gwendolyn. The game toys with this fact by having the game over, or death screen, be a cut back to the present, where Gwendolyn questions how Graham is still around. Graham then corrects his story, allowing for the player to try again.
You just pranced into a dark cave filled with vicious wolves?
I'm not sure. Maybe I should pause for reflection.
Ugh.
This is a classic version of the past tense first-person perspective, as Graham puts his own fun little flourishes and details on parts of the stories as he tells it and remembers it. With the uniquely interactive medium of video games, Valve Software saw an opportunity to take the first-person perspective a bit more literally in their game series such as Half-Life and Portal. From the beginning of the game to the end, the camera stays in the player character's head. From a game design standpoint, this meant that the game designers always had to work to draw the player's attention to important things, especially story beats and events.
Since we never take control away from the players, it can be a real pain to get them to notice important environmental events. It's a constant design challenge for us. The Citadel will be erupting in a massive light show that took 10 of us 2 months to orchestrate, and if we're not careful, the player will end up facing the other direction staring at a tire. In this case, to establish that the Citadel is coming apart at the seams, we wanted the player to notice the debris falling off of it. We used a pretty straightforward method here. Alex explicitly mentions the Citadel while pointing at it. Like most of these solutions, it's not foolproof, but it has a high success rate.
This impressive use of set design allowed for a more immersive experience, as each of the player's triumphs and failures were always from the same perspective.
Gordon, there's something snooping around out here. Oh my god.
While Valve was always conscious of what their players were looking at, the main thing I'm really excited to talk about is what game designers allow you to look over entirely. More specifically, what I'm talking about, silent storytelling in games. At a cursory glance at the game, Nintendo's The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is very calm and relaxing. Soothing, slow piano pieces rarely break the calm of the immaculate sound design which enwraps the player in the game's nature-rich setting. A stark contrast to Breath of the Wild's predecessors, which are bombastic and vibrant, even in similar settings. With this sort of difference in tone, a player who is handed a controller at a random point in the game might think that the game is a little more calm and peaceful as opposed to the hero's journey to defeat the ultimate evil, which, is par for the course with the series. In reality, however, Breath of the Wild has one of the darkest stories in any game in the series. The premise of the plot is given to you at the very start. Your player character, Link, has been asleep for 100 years after failing to stop the prophesized Calamity Ganon from destroying the Kingdom of Hyrule. Link has lost all their memories, and as such is in a similar position as the player with regards to how much knowledge they have about the world. Despite the hero's failures being a very integral part of the overall plot, not many characters throughout the game seem to mention these events that would be known as the Calamity. The only people who do are usually relevant to the main plot and were affected directly by the Calamity. This sets an interesting tone throughout the game, as the events which are so integral to the plot are seen almost to every other character as nothing more than history. In a way, it almost mimics how current generations feel about the world wars. Crucial, important parts of history, but still just history, you know? While an interesting way of showing how the in-game world interprets events of the past, it still creates a weak narrative. Something which reviewers, who gave the game glowing remarks in almost every regard, were quick to point out.
One of the more prominent flaws within Breath of the Wild is the lack of character development amongst the entire cast. The plot is fairly top-heavy in the sense that it seems promising at the beginning before sending you off into a journey that ends up having little direction or plot-centric cutscenes until the end of the game.
The story was poorly told and executed. It had a ton of wasted potential. The Shrine of Resurrection was a pretty unique way to start the game, and then it was just done and gone, and no one really cared about it.
Although the game never outright shows or tells the player the true depth of what happened during the Calamity through cutscenes or character dialogue, that is not to say it shies away from telling these stories. Rather, it does so through a use of silent storytelling. But what is silent storytelling? In simple terms, silent storytelling is anything which the author does not outright tell you, allows you to interpolate or theorize about on your own, or allows you to look past. Silent storytelling is often overlooked in most forms of media. While it's still possible to use silent storytelling to enhance a contemporary story told through a book or movie or television show, the non-interactive nature of these mediums do not lend themselves well to the silent narrative structure. In video games, items descriptions, set dressings, area design, object enemy placement, and even game mechanics can all be used to tell a story without outright explaining their connections to the player. In Breath of the Wild's case, a heavy importance on enemy placement, set dressings, and area design to give players a glimpse into the tragedies of the Calamity are all used. This is the Akkala region of Hyrule, located to the most northeast section of the map. It is somewhat secluded. Any player who is merely trying to beat the game's 4 dungeons and the final boss might never even step foot in this area, as the only time the player is told to go there is by completing a separate optional objective, which in and of itself is only mentioned during one section of the game's main plot. The area itself is one of the most dangerous in the game, with many powerful monsters found in it. The area reeks in the themes of death and decay. Large, jagged mountains almost seem like large, porous bones. Every tree bears the color of autumn as their leaves are dying, and there is even a death trap of a lake, which is fittingly shaped like a skull. The ghastly atmosphere created by the Akkala region is present almost anywhere you look, as even small set designs begin to beg the mind to question further. Such is the case with this long, broken, and decaying horse wagon, which is seemingly fall down a sheer cliffside into the water below. The fortunate passengers on the wagon meeting the same fate as it, the unfortunate ones being forced to swim to the only shore which leads back up, a shore which is located under Hyrule's final gambit and final failure, the Akkala Citadel.
That's the Akkala Citadel ruins. Long ago, at the peak of Hyrule's power, they built a fortress to protect Akkala. It was said to be unassailable. But during the Great Calamity, Hyrule Castle fell. The army had no royalty to lead them. With no other choice, they fell back to the Citadel to make their last stand. Sadly, a concentrated assault from the out-of-control Guardians spelled the end for this fortress too. In a real sense, the Kingdom of Hyrule met its doom here.
This information is given to you by a young man named Nell, who you save from an assault from a large monster at the destroyed entrance to the Citadel. Other than that one of the soldiers who fell here was an ancestor of Nell, the game tells you very little information about what else happened at the Citadel 100 years ago. But that is not to say that an adept and perceptive player cannot use the little information they are given to piece together what really happened those 100 years ago. Observing the Citadel in its ruined form reveals that it has been vehemently destroyed and corrupted beyond repair. Entire rooms have been flooded with the physical embodiment of Calamity Ganon's evil, a substance known as malice. If the player touches the slimy substance, they slide off of it, armed for it. This means that when exploring the ruins, one has to take a specific route to climb the large tower which serves to map out the Akkala region. This tower has aided in the Citadel's destruction, as it has laid dormant underneath the earth for a multitude of millennia before the events of the game began. In exploring the ruins, the player will discover soldiers' equipment, which has survived the onslaught and 100 years of dormancy, showing that this battle had a decisive victor and was not won by attrition. Something odd I noticed about the Citadel as opposed to Nell's story about it was the lack of guardians around the Citadel itself. Despite putting emphasis on guardians, the large octopus-like automatons equipped with laser cannons, the only guardians which seem to be around the Citadel are smaller flying versions known as Guardian Skywatchers. If one goes through the Citadel and gains the map information from the tower and moves on, they don't have much information to work with, as the Citadel is far too gone to safely understand what happened. However, looking at the terrain near the Citadel reveals quite a bit more. At a cursory glance of the Citadel, it is clear that it actually rests on top of a small but incredibly steep hill. This heavily bolsters the Citadel's defenses, as an average medieval army would be forced to use the main entrance or climb. This is something which defenders of the Citadel understood, as they had cannons which were ready to fire at would-be attackers. Of course, an army of malice-fueled robots is no ordinary army. And that is when I realized that the Guardians have been shown to be adept at climbing with their multiple legs. Legs which are also the weak spots of the Guardians, as they are easy to sever, thus leaving them immobile. If the guards of the Citadel wanted to deal with such a threat, they would merely sever the legs of the Guardians as they climbed, allowing them to fall down. Exploring east, west, and south of the Citadel reveals no Guardians, but it is when you look to the north, down the furthest and most sheer cliff of the Citadel, that you see a veritable Guardian graveyard set on the floodplains of the same lake as the carriage we spotted earlier. The only place where one could feasibly climb out of the lake basin. With such a well-made and seemingly effective strategy for dealing with the Guardians, it seems odd that the troops would have lost so decisively. But of course, the Skywatcher Guardians which patrol the ruined Citadel make the final piece clear. The Citadel was never built to deal with flying invaders, as such a thing was never heard of. Without the proper weaponry to deal with such a threat, the Citadel was quickly overrun, and the soldiers were forced to perish in the Citadel or flee. Of course, with the only entrance to the Citadel being destroyed, the same height advantage which previously protected the soldiers now trapped them. Looking at the cliff which the Citadel rests on, it is clear that there was only one realistically safe way down. One which the soldiers probably knew about, as it leads to the Akkala Citadel parade grounds, an area designed for more joyous occasions as soldiers would gather for parades. An area that they would have to get through for freedom. An area which a large one-eyed giant known as the Hinox decided to call its own. On a necklace around the Hinox's neck are the weapons of its victims. Soldiers' weapons.
In a real sense, the kingdom of Hyrule met its doom here. I found out my own kin died in that battle, so I came to at least pray at the spot where they fell.
Of course, this might all be coincidence, and I might be grasping for a larger story than what is apparent from this optional area of one of the largest open-world exploration games ever made. I could turn out to be entirely wrong, as a new game which will take a look at the Hyrule of 100 years ago was announced while I was writing this video. It even features the Akkala Citadel as one of its major maps. But the point is more so that through just a few lines of dialogue to set me on the right track, I was able to either create or learn so much more about the lore and mythos of the area through carefully chosen enemy placement and world design. This example shows one of the strongest aspects of silent storytelling: the ability to allow the audience to experience the story and come to their own conclusions without ever forcing the audience to do so. Unlike most other mediums, which tell the story the way they choose to do so, regardless of the audience's potential wants, video game players often tailor their experience to fit their own needs. Some players want a more cohesive story and are fine with taking a break from gameplay to learn more, while other players wish to keep the downtime of their playing to an absolute minimum. Silent storytelling has seen an increase in use as a storytelling medium recently, as players who would notice these more subtle details are the ones who would be interested in learning more anyway, while those who wish to continue pushing forward in the game would not be upset for missing such a detail. The use of silent storytelling has become so prevalent, some games have even begun to use it as their main way of telling a narrative. Bloodborne is an action role-playing game with a setting and story based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft. The game's creators at FromSoft are known for having a heavy use of silent storytelling in their games, and Bloodborne is no different. A player who just moves through the game without stopping to think will probably end up confused but satisfied by the time they have beaten the game, a fact which is almost ironic as it lines up with the overall theme of the game's story. Bloodborne follows the player's character as they arrive in the great city of Yharnam, a sprawling city of Gothic and Victorian architecture, veritable valleys of carved stone brick which once housed the citizens of Yharnam surround you, though now they are almost entirely empty, save for the beasts which have not escaped the rooms they once call home, as the city has been falling to the scourge of beasts, a scourge created by necessity. As when a great plague befell Yharnam, the healing church found a miracle cure known as the Old Blood. Though it became a cure for the plague, it also infected the people, allowing for them to become great, horrendous beasts when nighttime fell. As more beasts began to roam the nighttime streets, so too did the individuals known as hunters who would search out and destroy the beasts. The player character arrives in the evening in search of this fabled miracle cure, the Old Blood, as a last resort. As they awake from their blood infusion, they find that the night has risen, and this beastly scourge has caused the city to fall as night never seems to end. In return for their transfusion, the player is forced to become a hunter linked to a place known as the Hunter's Dream, a place of respite where they will return to should they perish. Their task is to simply bring an end to the endless night. As the player, now simply known as the Hunter, delves deeper into the heart of Yharnam, they will often meet those who have not yet succumbed to the scourge, hunters, lucky civilians, and members of the church. Many of these characters have questions and goals which can only be attained by finding the answers they seek. During these chaotic times, a question as simple as, "Where's my mother?" can have as many ramifications as the myriad of blind and wrathful questions asked by a church hunter named Alfred. Upon first meeting Alfred, he is kind and wishes to offer his assistance by speaking to the hunter about many various topics of interest. These topics relate to the Old Blood in the Healing Church, as well as Alfred's own prey as a hunter, those he refers to as Vile Bloods.
Ah, there's something I want to tell you. A bit of wisdom from the eminent master Logarius. Once, a scholar betrayed his fellows at Bergenworth and brought forbidden blood back with him to Canehurst Castle. It was there that the first of the inhuman Vile Bloods was born. The Vile Bloods are fiendish creatures who threaten the purity of the church's blood healing. The ruler of the Vile Bloods is still alive today, and so, to honor my master's wishes, I search for the path to Canehurst Castle.
Sometime after this meeting with Alfred, the hunter receives a summons to Canehurst. The letter's description reads, "An old blood-stained summons, inviting an honored guest to the forsaken castle Canehurst. Rather bafflingly, it is addressed to you. Do not hesitate. The stagecoach leaves from Hemwick Crossing." Such an alluring summons would pique the interest of any perceptive player, as they may seek the stagecoach in Hemwick Crossing and arrive at an entirely optional area known as Canehurst Castle. The old castle seemingly rests in the middle of nowhere as snow piles on its keeperless grounds. Hundreds of stone statues eerily cover every corner of the labyrinthian castle, filled with secrets and dangers. As the hunter arrives at the highest rooftop, they are challenged by Alfred's master, Martyr Logarius.
In his time, Master Logarius led his executioners into Canehurst Castle to cleanse it of the vile bloods. But all did not go well, and Master Logarius became a blessed anchor guarding us from evil. Tragic, tragic times, that Master Logarius should be abandoned in the accursed domain of the vile bloods. I must free him, so that he may be properly honored in martyrdom.
The hunter defeats Logarius and receives the illusory crown. Donning the crown reveals a hidden section of Canehurst Castle, where the vile-blood Queen Annalise is sitting alone on her throne. The hunter may choose to interact with her or not, but on a table in that same room is another summons, attributed to no one, which therefore means it could be attributed to anyone. Returning to Alfred, the hunter may give the letter to him, which he will thank the hunter for, as he prepares to solidify Logarius as a martyr by finishing what Logarius started.
Master, look! I've done it! I've done it! I smashed and pounded and grounded this rotten siren into fleshy pink pulp. There, you filthy monstrosity! What good's your immortality now? Try stirring up trouble in this sorry state, all mangled and twisted, with every inside on the outside for all the world to see.
With this, Alfred has killed the last of the vile bloods, made his master a martyr, and makes himself a martyr by finding death at the same statue which you first meet him at. His purpose served. Or is it? Inspecting the puddle of Annalise reveals that her remains are eerily writhing, seemingly trying to put themselves back together as would be assumed from an immortal being. However, such a process seems far too slow for her to ever be able to reasonably regain power, should she ever reform. However, should the hunter bring her gathered remains to the altar of despair, an altar which is seemingly being used to revive a beast which the hunter slayed earlier in the night, altar found in yet another entirely missable location, they may revive Annalise, who, without any more opposition, is free to do as she pleases. As such, the story of the triumphant church hunter Alfred, who found their way to Canehurst to kill the last vile blood even Martyr Logarius could not best, becomes a tragedy about how the warden of the unkillable last vile blood was slain, and in his arrogance, the last hunter of vile bloods thought he had irreparably destroyed the last vile blood, and took his own life, only for the last vile blood to rise again. Of course, Alfred never questioned such things. He always took the information he was given and used it without a second thought. He never stopped to ask why the church committed genocide against the vile bloods, or why Martyr Logarius acted in the way he did. He simply did what he thought was best, and died happily for it without ever knowing the depth of its own failures. Of course, this idea of blissful ignorance is taken even further at the idea that some players may have never even taken the original summons to Canehurst, and that Martyr Logarius stood upon the rooftop, perhaps waiting for Alfred to be the one to find him, instead of the hunter. This theme that knowledge is a curse is prevalent throughout all of Bloodborne, as well as Lovecraftian literature as a whole. By using the interactive medium of video games and its relationship with silent storytelling, FromSoft was able to take the idea of how one might be mindlessly seeking knowledge without knowing for sure the ramifications of learning such things. A proper use of silent storytelling in this manner can elicit deep thinking from its audience and their own want to explore and learn more without being forced to do so. With this in mind, I wish to call back to what I said earlier about how the simple request from a little girl asking for her mother could have the same tragedies and ramifications that a story of a crazed church hunter and an immortal being can have. Have I piqued your interest to know more? Well, if you really wish to know more about how silent storytelling pushes this story further, I recommend you play the game or watch a different video on the subject. But of course, with everything I've said about knowledge being a curse, I'll leave it up to you to learn more at your own risk. I hope you all enjoyed my little over-analysis of some interesting things I noticed in these games I enjoyed. If you learned something new or have your own insights, comment below and subscribe. I don't have much in the way of social media, I don't have anything else to plug, so with that said, thank you for watching. Bye!